So in terms of our objective and what we do, everything that we do is working towards our vision of a productive, profitable and progressive Welsh agricultural industry, delivering jobs, growth and investment to Wales. You know, we are very proud of the fact that we are the cornerstone of a 7 billion food and drink industry that employs 250,000 people. I think that's something that we need to be very proud of. Our ambition is to continue to build and grow that going forward. So we haven't sort of sat around waiting 2 years for Welsh Government to come forward with a consultation. As soon as we had the referendum 2 years ago, our Welsh Council met and agreed sort of 10 key principles around what we'd like to see in terms of future agricultural policy, our future trading relationship, you know, how we could access labour on both on farm and in the processing sector going forward, and looking at regulation and how we could get a more proportionate, simpler regulatory regime in Wales. So that autumn then we held a series of meetings, road shows throughout Wales where we engaged with hundreds of our members, and in early 2017 as a result of that we came forward with sort of 4 vision documents, one looking at policy, one looking at trade, labour and regulation. And I think a lot of what we've got in there, covering those 4 topics, are as relevant today as they were when we launched them some 18 months or so ago now, and I think, you know, they can be used as a basis of our policy response going forward. So I'll just touch briefly in terms of the agricultural policy and how we felt a future agricultural policy should look. And we felt it should be firmly based around 3 key cornerstones, 3 key interlinked cornerstones. One, look at sort of productivity, making sure that farmers had access to investment measures to be able to drive their business forward, to be able to invest in new technology, invest in measures that can help to take your business forward, and alongside that having access to research and development and the knowledge exchange and skills that you need to address the challenges and the opportunities that we'll face from Brexit. In terms of environment, we were very clear around that environment should be, you know, a key cornerstone going forward. We believe that every farmer who undertakes environmental activities and goes beyond the regulatory base should be rewarded for doing so. So we felt that everyone who's prepared to do that should have access to an entry-level farm scheme going forward. And above that, an advanced level then, which would maybe sort of targeted at people who could have already been in an agri-environment scheme for over a quarter of a century, could be in an area of natural constraint, have special scientific interest on your farm, be organic. So a further opportunity with increased payments and possibly access to a capital grant scheme, and underpinning that sort of volatility and stability measures. And in terms of, you know, what are they? Well, at the moment, obviously, they are delivered through the basic payment scheme, but there are also other measures available in Europe and throughout the world that provide the stability to help deal with the huge market fluctuations, to help deal with extreme weather events. And obviously, we've experienced those pretty much over the last 12 months in terms of the extremes of the wet and the dry, and, you know, in terms of dealing with sort of protectionism, trade bans. We just have to look back a couple of years ago to the Russian trade ban and the impact that had in virtually sort of halving the price per litre that we receive for our milk. So again, the opportunity is there to have those stability measures, because we feel, you know, you need stable businesses to be able to invest in productivity and to invest in the environment. And just before the sort of consultation was launched, we went back to the sort of key principles that we put in place some 2 years ago, and you know, we feel that in terms of judging this consultation, we should be judging it against those principles. And the first principle was around making sure that we have a policy that underpins the continued supply of safe, quality, traceable, affordable food for our nation. And we were heartened just before the Royal Welsh Show that YouGov did a survey on behalf of 1,000 consumers in Wales, and over 80% of those believed that farmers' primary role was to deliver that. And again, over 80% felt that farmers should be financially rewarded through government for ensuring that. So I think that's quite a strong message from the Welsh consumer there in terms of what they want to see going forward. We believe that in terms of environmental works, that farmers should be fairly rewarded for what they already deliver on farm today and what they'll continue to deliver in future. And Rachel will come on to that in some more detail in a minute. I think particularly relevant to this meeting today was the importance of making sure that future policy and support goes to the active farmer. So the person who's doing the work on the farm, the person who's taking the financial risks associated with food production. In terms of investment measures, again, making sure that those are available and are there to support and help farmers to face the challenges and maximise the opportunities from a post-Brexit marketplace. Making sure that regulations are proportionate, and crucially in terms of regulation and future funding that allows us to be able to compete with the rest of the UK, the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. Because at the end of the day, in terms of us producing food, we are competing with all those countries in terms of trying to get our product onto retail shelves. So just moving on to the sort of consultation now. Consultation was launched, as I say, just before the Royal Welsh Show, runs to around sort of 64 pages, and those are the sort of the key words and key themes that come up time and time again throughout the consultation, and that's what sort of Rachel and myself will sort of concentrate on now in the next few minutes. The first point is they don't call us farmers within the consultation. Everything is about land managers. And in terms of the consultation, land managers and land management, they say, means farmers, foresters, and any other activity delivered on non-urban land to produce goods and services. And they say that reflects the fact they're looking to put in place a land management policy going forward. They recognise that the vast majority of land managers are and will continue to be farmers, but again, I think this is an important point, and probably when we discuss on later in terms of land managers, who do they see that? The landowner or the person farming the land? In terms of who are land managers, they are potentially a lot more than just farmers. Anyone who potentially owns land could be a land manager. And again, so in terms of what they see in terms of policy going forward, and when we look at the funding as well, there is the potential for the funding to be spread far more thinly than it is at the moment from further afield than just those who currently receive CAP support. In terms of transition, in terms of how we move from where we are now to what Welsh Government propose, Welsh Government have put this right at the end of the consultation, but we've brought it to the front because this is going to be the most immediate thing and the most immediate change that you see in terms of your farming business. So what do Welsh Government say? Well, they say that CAP has been insufficiently targeted to support land managers after Brexit. They don't think that basic payment scheme's done enough to improve farm productivity, and in environmental terms, they don't think the CAP has done enough to take account of the wider benefits and consequences from land management. So they are proposing a multi-year transition, a transition over a number of years from what we've got now to their new land management programme. So in practice, what they're talking about in terms of transition, well, we filled our basic payment scheme form in by the 15th of May this year. Hopefully 90 to 92% of people will receive their single farm payment on or very close to the 1st of December. This year, as a result of the drought, we have managed to secure a loan scheme, so those who maybe are subject weren't going to be paid in early December will be able to access this loan scheme where you will receive around 70% of your basic payment scheme on or around the 10th of December if you apply for it. 2019, they're looking to pay on the same basis as this year, so nothing's really going to change from next year. And then they propose to begin the transition in 2020, and the proposal then is to have it completed by 2025. Why do they say they need to do this transition? Because they recognise how important the basic payment scheme is to our farm business income, and they need to be careful, sensitive and clear in terms of how they phase these payments out. They propose some options there about how they're going to do that, and this will be subject to a further consultation early next year. But what they do talk about maybe is reducing in absolute terms, so taking a fixed figure off everyone's payment in each year until they get to zero, maybe doing it proportionally on a percentage basis, or introducing sort of capping on the highest payments and bringing that down over those number of years until it comes to zero. They also talk about maybe changes to some of the greening rules, inspection criteria, and to cross-compliance. Again, perhaps we think that's a good idea. Word of caution, I think something we need to consider. At the moment, 30% of our payment is tied to achieving greening. Now, thankfully, in Wales, most farms are green by definition, so you don't actually have to do anything different to what you're currently doing. Not such an issue, more of an issue in the arable sector, certainly in Wales, but we don't want to give them an excuse to take that 30% of the payment overnight. So again, I think we need to be careful how we respond to that consultation when we see it next year. In terms of the Rural Development Plan, I suppose specifically Glasgow we're talking about, they reiterate the commitment that if you're in Glasgow, they will honour the contract until the end of that, even if it is until after we leave the European Union. So if you're in a Glaston contract now, it's honoured until the end of that. Some of you may be going into Glaston on the 1st of January next year for 5 years. Again, you signed the contract before we leave the EU, so that commitment there is there to honour that for those 5 years. And what they talk about then is, as the basic payment scheme is reduced, as we come out of the rural development programme schemes, that they will use that funding that's released from that to start to introduce the new schemes that Rachel will come on to in a second. In terms of funding, what they say is, in terms of taking some of these policies forward, they are constrained at the moment by not knowing how much funding there will be from the Westminster Government and how that will be delivered to Wales. But they do reiterate the commitment they previously made that funding from Westminster for agriculture will be ring-fenced for us going forward. But as I say, we're talking about land management support there now, so again, potentially that funding is wider than where it currently goes. Nevertheless, what they do also highlight is that in terms of future schemes, they say that they need to be more transparent to Welsh citizens and to what society wants achieved from future land management support. There's a chapter on regulation there as well, and again, I'm sure many of us possibly saw leaving the EU as an opportunity to have some more proportionate, simpler regulation, to look at sort of how some other countries are regulated, which is probably in a different way to how we are regulated. You know, we are clear that we want to continue to make sure that we achieve the highest standards in the world, but I think there's simpler, more proportionate ways of doing that. And some good words from Welsh Government in terms of agreeing with us on that, but I would say the only firm piece of what they talk about in terms of regulation suggests increased regulation, and one option they mentioned there is basic measures. And basic measures was something they first highlighted in a consultation about 12 months ago, where they're basically talking about bringing a new regulatory baseline in for many of the things that we currently do as part of receiving our single farm payment. So some of the things around good agricultural and environmental conditions, for example, in terms of water quality, soil health, animal health and welfare and air quality objectives, talking of bringing some of those things into regulation, which basically increases the baseline, which Rachel will come on to in a minute, is a little bit of a concern, because if we're talking about future agricultural policy, you can actually only pay for things that are above regulatory baseline. So if you increase the level of regulation, in terms of what we can be supported to deliver in future, it tends to constrain that. And as you say, that's quite an important point to consider when we talk about some of the new proposed schemes. But again, in terms of regulation, what they talk about is that is something that will be subject to a further statement later on this autumn and a consultation early next year. So I'm going to hand over now to Rachel to go through into some sort of detail in terms of the two proposed schemes that within the consultation.
Okay, thank you, Nolan. Yes, so the early chapters of the consultation, they place a big emphasis, Welsh Government does, on making that case for change. So whilst the consultation does acknowledge that the true economic value of agriculture can only be valued when you consider its role in underpinning the Welsh food and drink sector, which is Wales's biggest sector, and its role in underpinning the tourism sector through the provision of that landscape goods, its role in underpinning our rural communities and also in sustaining the Welsh language. They recognise that, and they recognise that food producing farms are at the core of Welsh land, and they need to be resilient to continue to be able to deliver these goods. At the same time, they repeat time and time again that they believe that the CAP is insufficiently targeted and it's not done enough to improve farm productivity, and it's not done enough to take account of the wider benefits and consequences from land management that society is seeking. So in terms of Welsh Government proposals for the future and what will actually replace the Common Agricultural Policy, what will replace those direct payments as they are phased out, Welsh Government is proposing a land management programme. And the land management programme they propose is based on or built on around five key principles that have been identified by the Cabinet Secretary. Number one is to keep farmers, foresters and land managers on the land. Welsh Government recognise that food production is vital for our nation, and food remains an important important product from Welsh land, but they say that reform needs to be done in a way that it builds prosperous and resilient Welsh land management industry. It says that future support will encompass the provision of additional public goods from the land, and Welsh Government believe there's no reason why the same land, the same farms can't produce food and public goods. In many cases, they state, farmers are already, or land managers are already doing both. And the fifth principle is that all land managers should be able to access new schemes. And I think before I move on from this slide, it's just useful to say that we've seen various iterations of these 5 principles since the Cabinet Secretary first described them at the NFU conference in Birmingham back in February, when at that conference it was very much about keeping farmers on the land. So we've seen a shift away from that. In March, in a statement, she referred to food production, but only where it's sustainable and economic. And she's talked about there being no universal automatic payment in the future. And, you know, as things have moved on, we've seen the shift from it being land managers on the land, but also recognising that land use, which is an important point, land use and those people on the land can be expected to change over time. So in terms of the detail of the land management programme that will replace the Common Agricultural Policy, Welsh Government proposed a land management programme built around 2 large flexible schemes. The first they describe as the Economic Resilience Scheme, and that is fundamentally investment in economic activities. The second is the Public Goods Scheme, and that's direct support for public goods delivery. They say there'll be strong links between the 2 schemes. They'll be designed and implemented in parallel. Many land managers will benefit from both, and the fundamental reason why we're all here today, that the future land management programme will need to take account of different ownership tenure relationships. At this point, they say that the balance of funding between the 2 schemes is not fixed, but is very much underpinned by that something for something approach, bearing in mind that in the future, that investment in land management investment will have to be justified and will have to compete against other funding areas such as health and education. So that's something for something, that transparency to the taxpayer about what that investment is paying is a fundamental principle for Welsh Government moving forward. So just taking the 2 elements in turn, we'll start with the Economic Resilience Scheme. That is targeted investment to both land managers and the supply chain supporting high quality food production. Important to note there, they're talking land managers, they're also talking about investment in the supply chain. So currently, if you look at where CAP funds are invested currently, there's obviously the Pillar 1, but under Pillar 2 Rural Development Programme, we do see some investment in the wider supply chain currently, but of course there's a big question about the balance of funding that will go to the supply chain in the future. Welsh Government proposed that the Economic Resilience Scheme is needed because agricultural productivity and in the UK and therefore in Wales has not kept pace with other countries. They identified that in Wales there are many high performing businesses, but there are others with significant potential to improve. They believe that departure from the Common Agricultural Policy gives them the opportunity to invest in land management businesses on a scale that's not been possible in the past. And they'll do this by providing a range of targeted financial support to those with the potential to become or remain viable. The ultimate aim, they say, is to help land management businesses to stand on their own 2 feet. I think it's a really important point that the viability point is one that's very, very important and potentially significant. How is that viability going to be demonstrated? What are the tests you as potential applicants to a scheme, what are the tests you're going to need to meet? And also that broader question, that bigger question of viability in the context of other countries. So we know that the EU 27 will continue to support their countries. I think they're proposing around 70-72% of the CAP budget going to direct support in the future. So that broader question of how viability will be assessed. So they plan to invest across the supply chain on the basis of a credible business strategy, that assessment of viability and the potential for return on investment. And again, you know, that return on investment will it be easier for a business in the supply chain to demonstrate that return on investment again when compared to small individual farm businesses. So in terms of the areas of support that the economic resilience scheme is looking to support, talks about increasing market potential, so competitiveness and access to markets. It talks about measures in investment support to improve productivity, so investment in infrastructure and new technology. It talks about advice and guidance to help businesses to diversify, and in the detail of the consultation it talks about shifts in primary production, so shifts from one sector into another, but also shifts out of farming activity, diversifying out of farming activity altogether. The consultation talks about supporting effective risk management through supporting skills and greater collaboration. And I think it's a really important point to note here that Welsh Government in the consultation, it does acknowledge that direct support, BPS, has supported farmers to manage volatility, but at the same time as acknowledging that, they are absolutely clear that it is not the job of Welsh Government to isolate businesses from normal business risks in the future. So that's a very important point. The final area of areas of support that the Economic Resilience Scheme will invest in is about knowledge exchange, skills and innovation. And I think if you want to compare that to sort of kind of offer we have now, fundamentally it's about the Farming Connect package that we have here in Wales, and also investment support, sort of the Sustainable Production Grant, Farm Business Grant, and possibly loans. So it's about Farming Connect, it's about investment support, and importantly it's about a much greater investment, a scaling up of that ambition. Moving on to the public goods scheme, essentially an agri-environment scheme. This will enable land managers to be paid for the production of outcomes for which there is currently no functioning market. And in the consultation, there are some suggestions as to what Welsh Government believe are public goods and also what they believe are not. So in simple terms, planting trees to sequester carbon is a public good. Management of a catchment to improve water quality is a public good. Management of peat bogs and peat bog restoration would be considered a public good, as would management of catchments to hold back water, so for flood alleviation further downstream. They would be public goods under their definition. They are absolutely clear, food production is not a public good. Renewable energy production is not a public good. Timber is not a public good. Tourism is not a public good. They have functioning markets, they're not public goods. Where markets exist, they say, so for example, where markets exist for food, Welsh Government support in the future will only be delivered through that economic resilience approach, so through that advice and guidance and investment support. In terms of the objectives of the new scheme, they describe that it will be a new income stream, open to all and paid on outcomes that society values. And I think that's open to all, as Dylan has mentioned earlier, is a very fundamental point. Open to all, if those public goods are not linked in any way to any sort of agricultural activity, I think we can see a much broader suite of applicants coming in to access future funding. In terms of the outcomes they say society values, they're talking about using the future funding mechanism to address some of society's most pressing problems. So things like climate change, habitat loss, adverse air quality and poor water quality. and by doing so through this mechanism, they hope that, or they anticipate that they increase community resilience in rural areas by ensuring that land managers are able to continue to manage the land. They say through the consultation that actually public goods delivery is already supported to some extent in Wales. They point to Glastir as an example, but they say that because Glastir has been restricted by costs incurred, income forgone, it's been an insufficient incentive, and it's only been delivering public goods at a very low rate. And for those of you who looked at the Mythbuster that was sent out by the Cabinet Secretary a week or so ago, Welsh Government have actually stated as fact that the public goods scheme will go beyond cost incurred, income forgone calculations. I think it remains a key question as to whether that will in fact be possible. So a bit more about the shape of the public goods scheme. I think they're proposing multi-year agreements, or multi-annual agreements, reflecting the time needed to deliver meaningful public goods, but also to provide land managers with a certainty and some security around that being a future income stream. Lengths are likely to vary, but of course we have to, the lengths of contracts that they're able to commit to also has to be balanced against the length of the Assembly term, and not committing the next government to sort of financial and budgetary commitments. Public goods scheme will be accompanied by the support of an advisory team, recognising the very big shift for you as farmers to land managers. So there'll be comprehensive advice package there. In terms of the range of options, we're talking tree planting, peat bog restoration, nutrient management, restoring floodplains, woodlands and grassland reversion. And in terms of a bit more detail of the shape, they say the scheme will be open to all, as I've mentioned. You know, they're talking about bringing a wider suite of land managers into contract. But they also say, another important point to note here, is that even where a farm is entirely improved, they will be able to access the public goods scheme, particularly if they're willing to change the use of some of that land. The principle of additionality is important, and I think I would make 2 points there. Number one, it's additionality. They will only pay above the regulatory baseline. Remember that regulatory baseline is going to be the subject of future consultation. There will be pressures, I suspect, to increase the regulatory baseline, and if that happens, then the scope to derive value from public goods delivery over and above could be restricted. And the other point on additionality is, throughout the consultation there's a lot to talk about create, restore, enhancing in terms of delivery of public goods. There's much less talk about maintain. So a number of you guys will have been involved in agri-environment schemes in the past. You've already created a lot of habitats. There's a lot of work that you're doing on an ongoing basis. The question still remains as to whether that work will derive any value in the future public goods scheme. So that's potentially concerning. They say the future scheme will be evidence-based. They're likely to make use of the of spatial targeting, so the Glastir advanced maps that underpin that scheme currently using that type of approach, which means that every sort of contract is going to be very sort of location specific. But they're only going to pay for the delivery of a specified outcome. So those of you involved with Glastir currently, you'll note that it's very prescriptive. If you follow the prescriptions, you receive the payment. This is a shift away from that to the payment on an outcome. So basically it's a results-based approach, and they are suggesting that they will identify proxy outcomes. So an example of a proxy outcome for which you could be paid is tons of carbon dioxide sequestered in new woodland. That's the specific example that they use. So they'll identify when they're developing the contract with you, they'll be identifying the baseline, and there will be ongoing measurement and monitoring, potentially by a third party but not Welsh Government, to measure the level of outcomes that you are delivering. It's payments by results, and with that comes the risk that if there's no outcome, or if the outcome is impacted for whatever reason, then there's no payment. And the question about who will be checking that is one that we need to consider very carefully. So, in summary, there will be no changes to BPS in 2018 or 2019. If you're in Glacier now, all your existing Glacier contracts will be honoured. Thereafter, so between 2020 and 2025, they're proposing a transition from the current to the new schemes. And those two new schemes will be an economic resilience scheme, which is essentially Farming Connect and grant support to farmers and the wider supply chain, and a public goods scheme, essentially an agri-environment approach for all those people who hold land in Wales and who want to deliver additional public goods. The consultation closes on the 30th of October 2018, and we do expect further consultation on regulation and also on the shape of the transition. More detailed consultation is then expected in the spring of 2019. So there's a sort of a diagram showing that transition, and I think anybody who remembers the introduction of Glacier, or who's been through a CAP reform or whatever, we know that 2025 is not a lot of time to develop what they want on the scale of change that they are proposing. In terms of a little bit of initial reaction, bear in mind, going back to the domestic agricultural policy that was based on consultation with our members around 2 years ago, I think if you go back to the ask or the shape of the policy we were proposing at that stage, I think there is a distinct lack of or even recognition of the need for volatility, stability measures. I think you only need to be farming in the last 12 months to know how important they are, but also we need to bear in mind that there will be other member states, and even within the UK, we don't know the shape of policies being developed in Scotland, Northern Ireland, but certainly other countries in the UK who will continue to receive that type of stability support. I think that there's a clear lack of link throughout the consultation to the Welsh Food and Drink Strategy, so it's very much an environmentally biased and that there's a lack of linkage there. I think the challenges to our global food production system are now well documented. We know the food production system, so I think that lack of linkage is concerning. The point of additionality, again, we don't know where that regulatory baseline is going to sit. There's going to be pressures from others, I suggest. And I think as farmers, there can be no doubt we're delivering public goods in abundance, and we must be rewarded for the delivery of the public goods that we're delivering currently. The active farmer, the reason why we're all in the room today, where those public goods delivery are not linked to any agricultural activity, who will receive that public goods payments, and we'll have some more discussion on that from Lou and Ella there in the next part of the meeting. And then finally, throughout that lack of evidence-based driving what are very fundamental changes, the impact assessment. And I think, we know from work that we've done as NFU, for every pound invested of public funds, we're delivering return of £7.40 on that investment. And I think we need that evidence to show that what is being proposed can achieve the same or more, or Welsh farm businesses, Welsh communities, and all communities, rural businesses that are dependent on Welsh farming are going to be poorer as a result. So just a quick note, quick slide on what the consultation questions are. There are 20, I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but there are questions around whether the framework, the model of a land management programme based around two schemes is the best way to deliver against Welsh Government principles. There is a specific question then on tenants, so does Welsh Government need to take action to ensure that tenants can access the scheme? There are questions around the shape of the economic resilience package. There are questions around the shape of the public goods scheme. They're requesting views on what the transition should look like, and there are also questions there on the impact of the on the potential impact of proposals on the Welsh language, and I think that's a question that tends to come up in most consultations these days. So just coming towards the end now, I think it's vitally important. This is such a profound consultation, once in a generation consultation. I think the shape of our industry for generations to come. And for that reason, we're very involved in getting out and meeting members as much as we can at the moment. We're also very engaged politically and also engaged with wider stakeholders who are clearly very influential in shaping future policy. I think we've got a designated area on the website with more information, and we're very much wanting your feedback to feed back into the NFU Cymru response, which will go to NFU Council next month. In terms of the consultation and your involvement, I think this, under no illusions, this is a consultation where numbers of consultation responses really does count. And other groups, the environmental NGOs, they're very busy mobilising their members in great masses. Great numbers of people are being mobilised. A lot of these people, a lot of spare time in their hands, very good at writing consultation responses. So, we need to make sure that we, as managers or farmers on 80% of the land area of Wales, we need to really make sure that our voice is heard, and to help our members and farmers do that. We've created an online response form. It's on our website, and it's an easy way to respond to consultation. And it's based around prompting questions to help you to formulate an individual response. So it's an individual response. Each individual response will have to be analysed separately by Welsh Government. And we've had some good uptake of that since it's been launched. It goes directly into the email response email address. It goes to the Cabinet Secretary, and you can opt to send it to 5 of your Assembly members as well. Remember, you've got regional AMs. And I think, politically it's moving the Brexit and Our Land consultation, definitely moving it up the agenda because it's landing in Assembly members' email boxes. So, so this is just a bit of a YouTube showing how it works. So I won't go through all this in detail. But I think fundamentally, just before I think we're at the end of my consultation, my presentation now, fundamentally it's about you asking yourselves, are the proposals going to work for you and in your businesses? If, I would really encourage you to use the online response form, but it's very, very important that your voice is heard through this process.